Now, as I said, today with me is one of our partners and my friend Amanda Dodge from MCC to share with us as someone who works closely with marginalized and vulnerable people and communities. So Amanda, again, welcome here. Thank you for joining this important conversation.
Thank you.
So Amanda, let's maybe start today with your personal story with justice. Why is this topic meaningful for you?
So through this work over the last 20 years or so, I've borne witness to injustice. I've seen how it operates through systems and individuals. I've learned the most from clients and community partners because the people who experience marginalization and oppression are experts in the power dynamics of how injustice works. I've tried to be an ally, as I'm not someone who experiences marginalization. I want to locate myself in this conversation as someone of European ancestry who's middle class. Because of my identity and socioeconomic position, I have a lot of benefits. In this work, I've made plenty of mistakes along the way. I've had a lot to learn and unlearn, and I still do. I have a debt of gratitude to the graciousness of my teachers. And today, I am grateful for this opportunity to come alongside you all as friends and share some of the things I've learned along the way. Yeah, when we think about justice, I think it's important to understand that it's about power. Power can be used in positive, constructive ways that support human flourishing. It can also be used in coercive and destructive ways that harm people. One thing we've learned about human nature is that the more we dehumanize others, in particular another group, the more we're able to justify violence against them. And this is why small dehumanizing acts between individuals are directly related to larger social harms like genocide and colonialism. As we talk about justice, injustice, and oppression, I think it's important to consider the systemic and the interpersonal dimensions of this. When we think about injustice happening, we're often thinking about it happening between individuals. Was someone treated unfairly by someone else? If so, was justice done in that situation, such as the person being held accountable or reparations being made? And yes, justice is about what happens in relationship. There's also a systemic dimension to justice, which is how we organize ourselves as a society, our social hierarchy, and the kinds of institutions that we develop and maintain that do harm to people. And we see this in the Bible. Isaiah says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws to deprive the poor of their rights." And Jesus denounced Jewish religious leaders and Roman rulers for their misuses of institutional power that harmed people. And even though much has changed over time, systemic injustice is still with us. Consider what was revealed around Colden Boushie's death and Gerald Stanley's acquittal regarding problems in our legal system like jury selection and societal attitudes around race and property. Or consider income disparity. It was recently reported that the top paid CEOs in Canada make 200 times the amount of their lowest paid employees, which is vast disparity that's hard to account for based on employees' contributions. Systemic injustice can sometimes be difficult to see. It tends to show up as patterns of differential treatment that some people are experiencing and others are not. As an example, the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission has done extensive research into discriminatory treatment in the access of rental housing, and they observed the pattern that landlords were less likely to rent to social assistance recipients, to that group of people, and especially if they were Indigenous or disabled. So when similar incidents happen to members of a people group repeatedly over time, it's a pattern that reveals systemic injustice. Well, I think that we can observe that human societies organize themselves into a hierarchy. It's as evident in the schoolyard as it is on a broader social scale. In a social hierarchy, there's people who matter more and people who matter less. And the degree to which we matter is generally determined by our personal characteristics, our membership in certain groups, our roles in society, basically our socioeconomic status. And those who matter more, they tend to benefit more from societal structures. Those who matter less, they tend to be tagged with stereotypes and experience stigma. negative ideas about them that seek to justify why they matter less. And that's what pushes people to the margins and makes them more vulnerable to harm. Like the examples we see in the Bible, the orphan, the widow, the leper, the tax collector, and so on. And those who matter more are afforded more power. They tend to have greater access to resources, are more likely to be taken seriously and heard, and are more likely to have the power to make decisions that affect themselves and others. And those who matter less are afforded less power. They tend to have reduced access to resources, are less likely to be taken seriously or heard, and are less likely to have power to make decisions that affect themselves and others. And this is actually the machinery of oppression. This is how oppression is operationalized.
Why can these realities be so hard for us to see and accept? What gets in the way till moments like this when we're confronted with it, and then so many things collide within us, whether it's cynicism, frustration, or excuses, or justifications, or on the other side, finally, we're talking about this. There's all these things that collide in us, and so two-part question, I suppose, is why is it so hard for us to accept and see, and what gets in the way?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that moment of candor that you had, because there are things inside of us that want to push against seeing these things. And we do have some strong human tendencies that make these realities hard for us to see and to accept. These kind of pushback pieces are largely operating on a subconscious level. So I'll share three of them. One is group identity. So group membership is really important to human beings, right? To know that we have things in common with others, it gives us a sense of identity, of order, and belonging. And that can be a really good thing, like being part of a community of believers. But unfortunately, it can create distance from people who are different from us, who belong to other groups, like the mosque down the street, and can create an us-them dynamic. And we tend to see our own group in a favorable light, and we see our own nuances, while we tend to make generalizations and assumptions about the other group. And that leads to othering, which makes it easier for us to hold stereotypes. Another key challenge comes from social messaging. Through our whole lives, we've been receiving messages about people in society that give us cues about who matters more and who matters less. And it's always coming at us from the people around us, educational experiences, the news, TV and movies, social media, advertising, and more and more. We're constantly ingesting it. One of my profs at the Indigenous Law Center said, racism is in the air, it's in the water, like we're ingesting it. And the messages become internalized beliefs that operate often below consciousness and become implicit biases. And it can be hard to bring them into our conscious awareness, and even when we do, it can take time to unlearn. Thirdly is our tendency to support the status quo of society. This is called system justification. We actually want to believe that social structures like the legal, health, education, and economic systems are legitimate and fair because it promotes our own sense of security. But unfortunately, it makes us more likely to adopt victim-blaming stereotypes to explain negative social outcomes. So for example, seeing an unhoused person on the street and assuming that their situation is due to their moral failings instead of larger systemic forces like a shortage of affordable housing or a low minimum wage. And we tend to do this because it reduces the perceived injustice and our discomfort about it. And so how can we imagine and live into the imagination of a more just world? Like, how can we be God's instruments in bringing about shalom? I think there are some practical ways to do this. I'm going to share some ideas, and these are all still works in progress for me. We can work to address that us-them, the othering tendencies that we have. We can think about what we're thinking about. Like when ideas pop into our heads, we can critically examine them. Like, are we stereotyping? Are we moving quickly to blame an individual while sidestepping a consideration of the larger forces that might be at work in their life? We can actively seek out opportunities to hear stories from people who are different from us, to erode stereotypes and help us see each other's value. There are many accessible resources like books and films and podcasts in which we can hear the firsthand experiences and perspectives of people who are different from us. It can be really easy for us to be discouraged by large social forces that create injustice in our world, but there are practical things we can do as individuals, and especially together as groups, to work toward a more just world. We can be that salt and light.